Well, thank you for being here with us this evening. I'm Gia Johnson, and I'm the program director for the Solidarity Building Initiative for Liberative Carceral Education at Cook County Jail for McCormick Theological Seminary. So here on out, I'll refer to the program as MTS SBI. So this evening's webinar was inspired by a 5-week public education series entitled Isolation in Perspective. I'm Gia Johnson, and I'm the program. Sorry about that. This evening's webinar was inspired by a 5-week public education series entitled Isolation in Perspective, Criminal Justice, Disconnection, and the Church. And so we heard from advocates, organizers, faith leaders, and educators from across the country who are all shedding light on the prison industrial complex and the ways in which COVID-19 has exposed the deep-seated inequities embedded within the carceral system. So we heard from those who are currently incarcerated, those who are formerly incarcerated, and from comrades in the struggle that our current system does more harm than repair. Every week, the speakers called us to reimagine the ways in which we respond when harm has been committed. And so we wanted to conclude the public education series by highlighting and learning from the important work that local advocates, organizers, and healers here in Chicago are currently doing. So as the program at McCormick, one of our core values is to build, to co-create and to collaborate. And so it was in that spirit that we reached out to our good friends at A Just Harvest, Reverend Dr. Marilyn Pagán-Banks, and Community Renewal Society's Reverend Dr. Waltrina Middleton, the executive director. And so we wanted to join efforts to host this post-webinar conversation entitled Transformation in Perspective, a grassroots conversation on disrupting structural systems of violence. And so we're grateful they accepted the invitation, and we are inspired by the opportunity to co-create a space for this conversation with some dynamic individuals committed to justice and human flourishing. So we want to say thank you to each of our speakers, and thank you for joining us this evening, and a special thank you to Rebecca Bretz, the program coordinator, for her efforts to contribute to coordinate our convening. So after we conclude the conversation, you'll have an opportunity to do 10 to 15 minutes of facilitated Q&A by Reverend Middleton. And so we invite you that throughout the conversation, feel free to submit your questions in the chat box. This conversation is also being live streamed on Facebook. So we invite you to host a watch party, and we'll also be recording and sharing this out for future viewings. So before we get started, I'll be facilitating us in a grounding practice, which will be an opportunity for us to firmly root and center our conversation in the here and now with people who are incarcerated right now. I'll share some of the scholarship from students in the MTS SBI certificate program at Cook County Jail. This summer, we collaborated with Professor Dr. Jenny McBride to design a reading and writing course on the topic of prison abolition in a new social order. The educational opportunity was intended to be a companion to the public education series. And so the students gave us permission to read their essays. So this evening, with our breath, we will reflect on some of the questions they invited us to ponder throughout the 5 weeks. So if I just want to invite you all to maybe settle into wherever it is that you find yourself and find a posture that is comfortable for you. Perhaps maybe you want to raise your shoulders a little bit. Just get comfortable. Perhaps maybe you might want to close your eyes and then begin to turn your attention towards your breath. I invite you to begin to take a few cleansing, inhaling and exhaling breaths. So go ahead and inhale and then exhale. Inhale and then exhale. And then do that one more time. Inhale, do we even know what justice is anymore? Exhale, a desire for our collective understanding of justice to be stretched and reimagined. Inhale, where is justice in an eye for an eye system of reform? Exhale, an igniting of our collective courage to resist a false sense of justice that is rooted in retribution and revenge, which says, I got my lick back. And even though I'm still hurting, at least I hurt you and your family. Inhale, does restricting of individual freedom and liberties when harms have been committed really the best form of justice that our society can come up with? Exhale, an awakening of our collective imagination to organize people and resources to imagine into existence new life-giving ways for repairing the individual and systemic harms that happen. Inhale, would you want your children or loved ones to be sent to prison or jail? Exhale, a stirring of compassion and empathy for those whom have been made to be criminalized. I invite you to begin to prepare yourself to be present for tonight's conversation. Begin to gather your remaining thoughts and reflections and hold them before you. If your eyes are closed, begin to open your eyes. And let it be so that through our collective breath, may our collective curiosity and imagination for creating a more just society for all people be ignited by the voices from those inside of Cook County Jail. Amen and Ashe. And with that, I invite Reverend Nanette Banks, McCormick's Vice President of Community Engagement and Alumni Relations, to do our introductions tonight.
Thank you, Gia, and welcome everyone. I have the honor of introducing our moderator and our panelists for this evening. Our moderator tonight is Reverend Dr. Marilyn Pagán-Banks, a Black Latinx queer womanist freedom fighter, gratefully, though not always gracefully, serving as Executive Director of A Just Harvest, Senior Pastor at St. Lucas UCC, and an adjunct professor at McCormick Theological Seminary. She is sustained in the struggle and find renewed joy and imagination in the movement towards liberation by the contagious laughter of her 11 beautiful and brilliant grandbabies. Dr. Pagán-Banks loves to have deep conversation and purposefully supports local artists. Along with many other writings, she is a godly proud contributor in the newly released book, Words of Her Mouth, Psalms for the Struggle. Welcome, Dr. Pagán-Banks. Our panelists tonight, Denise S. Ruiz, is a queer Boricua mother of two in Humboldt Park. She has served the community in Chicagoland area for almost 20 years as an advocate, youth worker, educator, artist, writer, activist, and cultural curator. She is the founder and designer of Madre de Perla Designs, an upcycled accessories company which celebrates the Caribbean culture and diaspora. She is the co-founder of Books, Brunch, and Botanica, a femme people of color-centered gathering that offers monthly wellness resources and knowledge. She recently founded the Honeycomb Network, a multifaceted mixed-use community space in Humboldt Park that centers on Black, Indigenous people of color as leaders, teachers, and creators. Welcome, Denise. Richard Wallace is an artist, organizer, and the founder of Equity and Transformation. His work focuses on organizing Black informal workers to confront anti-Black racism in the US and abroad. As a formerly incarcerated Chicago native, Wallace returned to his community to empower marginalized workers. Wallace is a nationally recognized artist who goes by the name of Epic of Chicago's rap trio, BBU. He is also the founder of the Roosevelt University student chapter of the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, the founder of the Future of Benin program in West Africa, one of the inaugural AFRI Fellows, a vocal alum, and was recently selected as Soros Justice Fellow. Welcome, Richard. Monica Cosby, a mother, grandmother, activist, organizer, Restorative Justice and Peace Circle keeper, poet, person of the theater, and a lover of books, music, cats, dogs, and the earth. Her life and work have been shaped and informed by the community she has belonged to, including the community of artists, scholars, and mothers with whom she was incarcerated for 20 years and whose survival was an act of resistance against a system that would dispose of them. Welcome, Monica. And Benny Lee, a community liaison and reentry specialist with TASK, where he prepares citizens to make successful transitions from incarceration back into the community. He is certified as a trainer of trainers in trauma self-care, Kingian nonviolence model, and prison reentry as a system. He is a sought-after international trainer and consultant, having presented throughout the United States, Israel, and Africa. He received both his bachelor's and master's degree at Northeastern Illinois University, where he's now an adjunct professor in the Justice Studies Department. He's currently the founder and CEO of the National Alliance for the Empowerment of the Formerly Incarcerated. Welcome, Benny.
Thank you, Reverend Banks, for that wonderful introduction and that sharing of the gifts that we are going to be hearing from and receiving on tonight. And just very quickly, I just want to say a little bit about why McCormick, why A Just Harvest, and why the Community Renewal Society have come together around this particular topic. And you've already heard from Gia what prompted this webinar, but I just want to say all of us are connected to, and we center the directly impacted folks in our community. Like, we know that we're not doing this work for, we're doing this work with, and we're actually wanting to be led by the community that's most directly impacted. All three of our organizations, we are bridge builders. We know that we cannot do this work in silos, and we certainly are not here to try to have folks come and fix our people, right? We know that we need to build bridges across communities and begin to speak truth to power, make some folks uncomfortable, but to do it in a spirit of transformation, not in a way that we're trying to impose our own presence, or as Monica mentioned earlier, we're not trying to buy into the nonprofit industrial complex. We are here about some serious transformation. And that also means we have to be willing to listen and be willing to be changed. And so we're not afraid of change. I also want to say that we're very grounded in community, right? We're not here to teach folk. We are here to be in community and to learn together how to be better humans while we have this time to be on this earth and to bring about the transformation all of our communities not just need, but deserve, and was already granted to them from the very beginning. And I finally will say that we are led with love, or by love, for our people. We love our people. And we know that this love is what's gonna cause us to not just fight, but to make sure that we are about the healing of our communities. So we're in it for the fight, we're in it for the win, and we're in it for the well-being of our communities. That's why these three organizations have come together around this work. At least that's a part of why we've come together. And I'm honored to be here and to help lead in this conversation. So we'll start by asking each of the panelists to answer this first question. Please tell us about your work and how you go about disrupting structural violence. And we'll start with Denise.
Hello, thank you so much. Again, I'm so honored to be here amongst this group of folks doing such important work. I think I'm just blown away already. And so I'm just really thankful to be in conversation and dialogue with you all. So thank you, Marilyn, for inviting me. So the Honeycomb Network is what I currently founded. It's a brick and mortar space that we acquired in January. It is a space that will offer co-working, co-creating, and wellness and collective care. It will center Black, Indigenous, people of color as leaders, as facilitators. They will be the ones running the programs, running the workshops exclusively. We're also looking to create different access to healing modalities, including a licensed psychiatrist on site who will offer accessible sliding scale community therapy to our community, who is bilingual, who's relatable to our culture and our community, who's from it. So, you know, creating that space for conversations, for support, for unpacking racial, cultural identity and generational healing. I think that doing that in an intergenerational way, collaborating with other communities of color is really important to build bridges, those bridges that you're even speaking about, to connect those networks and to strategize together and to get free together. And so it's really a place to also cultivate joy and to learn together, to co-create together, to intricately link wellness and healing to our liberation work and to our justice work. And so that's what the Honeycomb Network is. And before that, I was working with my co-founder, Cristina Gutierrez, for Books French Botanica, which is sort of a microcosm of what the Honeycomb is now, because we didn't have a space. And so we created this space for specifically femme POC, people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, femme presenting as a way to center that knowledge, that work, that wellness, nutrition, accessible wellness, accessible knowledge. You know, we did pop-up bookstores. We had, you know, different workshops throughout the year. We were doing this for like 4 years before getting this space. And then also as an artist in the community. And I've also been part of the nonprofit industrial complex for a long time. And so I come from that as well, that direct service within the community and outside in different areas of Chicago. And so trying to kind of connect all those dots, but outside of that structure, like reimagining something else, you know, and creating an abundance and a thriving mindset and resources and accessibility for our community in a way that is lacking right now. So, so yeah, that's where I'm at with the Honeycomb Network. Thank you.
And sometimes the best disruption shows up in the form of creating, right? So thank you for that. Thank you. Monica?
Hey y'all, so thank you so much for having me. I'm kind of outclassed. This is amazing. So much of the work I do centers around gender violence, and in terms of disrupting systems, it's participatory defense. So we work to get people out of the system who have been criminalized for surviving domestic violence. So sometimes we're working with people that are still in the appellate stages or in the clemency stages that have already been locked up for a very long time. Sometimes we're on the front end of this, right, when charges have started, right? And so we develop whole campaigns around this, and we're working to try to keep people from actually going to the prison, right? So it's a lot of public education, a lot of like low-key stuff that doesn't happen on Twitter and Facebook. So we do court support, like the obvious things. We show up at court as many people deep as we can get when someone's in the trial stage, right? To demonstrate to the court, right? They're not out here by themselves, you know. Some of it is sitting down with state's attorneys and DV advocates, saying pretty much, especially to your mainstream domestic violence advocates, tend to have contributed greatly to incarceration, right, and the criminalization of survivors. And so getting them to do things maybe in a different way, right, to help us meet with a state's attorney or something. Sometimes it is, and when we say disrupt, that means like to work out in a violent situation if they come with a police escort. So you're like guaranteeing that people get down with the system, when really what somebody needs sometimes is to just dip out. So creating the means for that, to get you, your kids, your stuff, and take you somewhere, right? So that you don't have to find your way there, you know? And so all of these kinds of things. A lot of times it's this happening all over the place, is mutual aid, right? And I tend to think of all my work as participatory defense. So in terms of like making sure somebody's got enough groceries or can pay their rent, that is disrupting state systems too. And I think we don't think about it like that. But those things can do to survive in the immediate, like we have to do that, but we also have to be looking at the long term, because this is a long-term thing here, right? And so it's making sure that people can survive as much as is possible without relying on the state, because we know it's not there to keep us safe. Not for real. Police are for after the fact. They come after the thing has happened. They don't keep a thing from happening. And so a lot of our work centers on surviving these moments, but building towards the future so that helping us unlearn some of the violence, right? Because we know violence happens, but it doesn't have to happen always in the way that it does. And so in all of our work, there's always the political education aspect to that, right? Rethinking and examining the ways that we contribute to things, the way that they are. And so mostly we're just trying to keep people from going into the system and just keep folks from getting swallowed up by the system. That's it.
Thank you, Monica.
Welcome.
Richard?
Hey everybody, how y'all doing? Y'all can hear me? Good. Richard Wallace, founder of Equity and Transformation. Also sit on the policy table leadership team. We're moving for Black Lives. I ride with Black Men Build, and All of Us Are None, Chicago, AKA Illinois, with my brother Benny over here. And so EAT was founded in 2018 by post-incarcerated people from Chicago in an effort to uplift the voices and power of Black informal workers. And a lot of times people be like, what do you mean by informal workers? We, in the streets, we call them hustlers, right? It is the Eric Garners of our world. It is the Alton Sterlings of our world. It's the cis and transgender commercial sex workers of our world. It is the folks that are boxed out of the formal economy due to anti-Black racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, all of the isms, right? And so theoretically, the informal economy is a diversified set of economic activities that are not regulated by the state. And so a lot of our folks end up there because they've been boxed out of the formal economy. And that looks like a young person, any person applying for a job and being denied access to that job because of their background. And so our mission is to build social and economic equity for Black workers engaged in the informal economy. And how we combat structural racism is one, 100% of our team is formerly incarcerated. I think one big part of this whole entire nonprofit industrial complex is that there are so many people in leadership positions over organizations and specific populations that do not come from don't come from those ranks. And so it was very important for me that we build an institution, we build an organization that was led, that was sharp, and it was formatted by formerly incarcerated people, and we can look everybody in the eye and say, we doing this work too. And so we build comprehensive campaigns which incorporate base building, research, advocacy, policy development, and communications. One of our most recent wins was the cannabis equity fight, along with the Pure Cannabis Coalition. We were able to shake out a whole lot of equity in the realm of cannabis, right? And at the time, when we first got engaged with the cannabis campaign, and let me explain this before folks, because sometimes folks get funny when it comes to weed. There's a legacy market that existed in Chicago. And so part of our analysis at EAT is that a lot of the informal occupations aren't fixed, right? These jobs, these hustles, whatever you want to call them, they're criminalized until the billionaire class chooses they want part, right? They want to play ball too, right? And so once they decide they want to play ball, what happens is bootleg and alcohol becomes Miller Lite, right? And on the Miller Lite side, there ain't no Black folks involved, right? And in the Jack Daniels fight, there ain't no Black folks involved. So there's an issue as it relates to the state choosing to legalize specific occupations that exist in the informal economy, right? That exclude Black folks on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? You look at bootleg and alcohol, there was hundreds of us involved, thousands of us involved in Jack Daniels stole our recipe, right? You know what I'm saying? And then you look at legal alcohol manufacturing today and you see no inclusion. So we saw the cannabis market as if they're about to do it again. And with the medical cannabis arena, there was 0% of Black ownership. And that made no sense because it was evident that Black folks were interested in the market because you can look at the arrest numbers and see how many folks was getting locked up for it. So the interest was there. Our people were already doing it. And it was like, how do we ensure that our people get access? not only do we how do we ensure that our folks get access to the economy, but also how do we ensure that people that have been victims of the war on drugs are also centered in this policy. So we began to fight along with the Pure Cannabis Coalition, which was made up of a host of brilliant Black-led institutions in the city of Chicago. And we're able to shake some equity out. It ain't perfect, but there's a lot of things that came out of it. One thing that I like to celebrate is the 800,000 folks that will have their records expunged. And so for some folks that will help. And for others, you know what I'm saying? Like cannabis is generally your first arrest, and then it starts the snowball effect, right? And so you get other charges, right? You know what I'm saying? Like you've been boxed out of the economy. So that's our recent one. That's what we do in order to combat, you know, structural racism. Is one, we are an institution that is led, which means that if you come to meet with us, you're gonna meet with a formerly incarcerated person, and you're gonna have to deal with that, right? And we're trying to take the mask off of all of this stuff. We're gonna be in jeans and t-shirts. We ain't gonna code switch for y'all. We ain't finna do any of that. And we are brilliant and we know what we're talking about. So that's what EAT is about. And it is essentially it's permission to eat. It's called equity and transformation. We go by EAT. Like, look, man, like we see the folks that's out here getting their reparations on, you gotta eat. And so that's who we are and what we do.
Benny Lee.
All right, thanks for having me this evening. Let me start off by saying I know I'm here because it's through the grace of a merciful God and a praying mother and a father I know in my heart that didn't give up on me today. And I think about many nights in Stateville maximum security prison praying that God let me out before my mother passed, because I couldn't think of one thing I've done to make her proud of me. Right, and that's when I got in reality what love means, and going in and out of prison and being shot and all that do not look like love. I guess my knack for this movement, specifically around reentry, it began in prison. You know, being a gang leader, I was a gang leader. As a matter of fact, I was a high-ranking member of the Vice Lords. And I got caught up in a riot, you could say social structured violent situation where Governor Thompson and director at the time, Charles Rowe, they said they expected the riot in Pontiac prison back in 1978. They expected that riot a year before it happened, because Pontiac prison was designed to house 600 inmates. And on the day of the riot, there was way over 2,000 inmates. There was countless grievances from the correctional officers to the administration, complaining about the condition they were working under, and there was strain between the correctional officers and the inmate. And that led into a riot, a rebellion. And when the Illinois Department of Law Enforcement finished their investigation, they twisted and said it was a gang takeover. So they ended up indicting me and 16 other gang leaders and charged us each with 15 counts of murder, 2 attempt murder, and mob action for the conditions we were living under. You know, and the only evidence they had against all of us is that we were known gang leaders. So that spirit to fight for that began during that time, staying on death row for 3 years, where I had to learn the law real quick because I couldn't understand the dialogue that was going on in the courtroom. So I learned that in order for me to be effective in my fight, I had to study what I was up against, which was the law. And coming out of that, you know, and getting my act together, being out, first going into social service as a certified substance abuse counselor, ran into a lot of conflict, you know, where clients that seeking drug treatment that were labeled gang affiliated would get discharged prematurely if they expressed anger. Whereas a regular client, they would allow them to work through the anger, but a guy that's labeled gang affiliated, they would discharge. So I got into that fight, and I designed a model, how do you work with gang affiliated substance abuse? So I've been fighting for that group I come from, the gang culture, the street culture, the prison culture, right? And I was able to spend a month in Israel with the Hebrew Israelites, where I learned a little bit about violence over there and speaking to the youth. And I spent another month in Ghana, West Africa, where I met with those that work in the prison system in Africa to get a different view of what reentry looked like and the system looked like. So how my organization naturally came about was around 2009. I would get a lot of calls from brothers and sisters coming home and say they wanted to get up with me because I'd been out the system for a while by that time. And those coming home wanted to come with me. So I called a meeting, and about 47 formerly incarcerated and convicted people showed up, and 12 of them were women. And I challenged them that we complain about what we can't do because of our backgrounds, but we're the most passive population in this country because we don't fight for ourselves. And we get mad when those that do fight on our behalf fail at it. So I encourage them that we need to become first a strong voting bloc, right? We need to become a strong voting bloc, and we need to once become registered voters, become sworn in deputy registrars, and go back in those communities where we come from. I don't care about homies that still strung out on drugs, register them to vote, and his family. We need to build a strong voting bloc, and then we need to start making our presence be known to the legislators in your area, right? And we had to learn, how do you get bills passed? What policies in place? What are these collateral consequences that serve as social disabilities to disable us, right, to function as legitimate citizens? And we got to continue to claim ourselves as citizens that have been disenfranchised because of these collateral consequences. So that's how we started. And so we've been involved with the fight to get the box sealed in Illinois. We've been involved with, at one time, there was only 9 cases in Illinois that could be sealed. And we fought, now there's only 4 that can't. And the ban the box, we've been involved with a lot. You know, I got to be real careful because of my background. And a lot of the people I work with coming out of prison is either gang affiliated or sort of known like that. Because of my status as a former gang leader, I got to treat every little brother I run into as if though he wired and he working for the police. Because I understand COINTELPRO, how they infiltrate your organizations, and next thing you know, you gone somewhere. And that's all they need is a guy like me that's been out 36 years and then worked my way from not having a GED or a Social Security card to becoming a professor at a university. That'll be a feather up on their belt if they can knock me off for some reason and demonstrate to the world these guys never change. And that's what I fight hard, and I tell these brothers and sisters that I went through some doors, and being successful through the doors I've been through, I keep the door open for you to come. If I fail, then I'm closing that door for you. So even now, my last point with this structured violence, you know, we see the young people looting. You know, people say they criminals and all that, but I had to go back in retrospect. I was that youth in 1968 when Martin Luther King got assassinated, and I was one of those youth that's for looting, that was breaking in stores, shutting down trucks, jacking people, all that kind of stuff. I was one of them youth that was angry, frustrated. So I understand these young people. I don't condone it, but now that I'm old and mature, but I understand it from being one of those youth, those that are marginalized because of limited education, no skills, can't market themselves. And this not just those that's got a criminal record. I'm talking about young people living in communities that probably grew up, unfortunately, with parents that wasn't educated and couldn't provide for them. They had to take the best route they could to try to survive off of what's in the streets. Like Rich was talking about, bootlegging became legitimized because people see how they can profit. You got to keep in mind, it was the blacks that came up with the policy, the number bracket, right? And it was illegal. But then they turned it to the lottery now. So they can control it. And that's been going on for centuries. So these are just some of the things I do. I'm trying to retire. You know, Richard has become my mentor now because he's going to help me retire. You know, I've been out here 36 years on the front line. I'm trying to turn this over to some young blood so I can sit down and chill. Thanks.
So let me build on what you just said, Benny, and a little bit of what Richard talked about in terms of the informal economy. And so we know that often when we hear the media and others talk about violence, the focus is on, you know, interpersonal forms of violence, whether it's gun violence, domestic violence, sexual violence, or like we've just seen recently, the destruction of property, right? And so I think that often there is a disconnection around those types of violence with structural violence, such as the laws or the policies, our economics, and the culture influences and perpetuates this kind that it. I'm trying to read it and reframe it at the same time since you brought it up, but economics and culture influence and perpetuate the interpersonal violence. So I know I kind of messed that up a little bit, but all the violence that the media wants to sort of talk about, we know is perpetuated and influenced by the violence that's more structural. So I'm wondering, and I've heard a little bit, but if you want to build a little bit more on how you are intentionally making these connections in your own work or in your work towards disrupting this violence and bringing about healing.
Well, one is, you got the, like Martin Luther King had 6 steps in nonviolence. And the first one, you got to get your facts, get your information together. And then the second, once you get your facts, you got to educate. You got to share it with others that's involved. Then you got to make a personal commitment to follow, the fight through. And then now you sit at the negotiation table. You need to learn who should you be negotiating with. You know, Franz Fanon in his writings, The Wretches of the Earth, he talk about when you got an oppressor that's oppressing a group and oppressing them by means of restricting them certain advantages, opportunities, and the oppressed try to fight back, and they find themselves ineffectively fighting through the legal system or whatever social disorganization, and they find their means of fighting is ineffective, but at the same time, the oppressors is constantly with their militarism, is attacking them with violence to restrain them, then the oppressed start fighting back with the same methods that the oppressor has used to oppress them. And what happens in most of the Black communities in Chicago, like for the one I come from in Austin, when I moved in there, we were like 1 out of 3 Black families on our block. And we ran into that, right? And what happened at a period of time, those that preoccupied the community in the beginning moved out, and then we moved in when it became overly populated with our people. The same fight, we were fighting those that was previously there for resources and opportunities, right? We find ourselves fighting each other, and that led to Black on Black crime, Black on Black violence, and Black gangs against Black gangs, right? And he pointed that out, and that made a lot of sense to me. And you see that now, that our so-called elite Blacks, after the Civil Rights Movement, got out of the city, and the community became depleted of those with degrees, and you know, because you go down South Park Boulevard, which is now Martin Luther King Drive, it wasn't nothing to see Black dentist offices, Black real estate, Black law firms, Black stores. And when the Civil Rights Movement pushed that door open for end segregation, elite Blacks left those poor, uneducated, those that were struggling there. And this is what you see, and we fighting each other over that. So that's structured, that's poverty. You know, that's a structured poverty, and that leads to violence and crime. I think it was Aristotle that said poverty is the parent of revolution and crime. Yeah. You have poverty, and that's what Martin Luther King called the 3 evils: racism, poverty, and militarism. As long as those exist, you're going to have violence, you're going to have crime. And it's structured and it's controlled. And the only way you can control that, you got to have some power. And these young people that's involved in it do not have the power to decide what resources go where and what resources don't go here, and what go up, what opportunities that someone with power can do that. And that's structured. So like
Richard's trying to jump in here. Richard, did you want to add to that, or talk about how you are intentionally making connections between structural violence and the violence that we see?
Yeah, I mean, I think I wrote it out, and I think I'll just go through that, right? Like, so this is, I mean, I think at the core of it is capitalism, right? I think that's the ugly word that folks don't want to talk about. And we have to begin at the core of what is the structure that is perpetuating the violence? What is the structure that puts inequalities, or they put value attributed to gender and sexual orientation, incarceration rates? You know what I'm saying? Like there's a system in place, right? And that system is called capitalism, right? And that structure is the bedrock of economic violence that we are discussing today, or we're seeing in Chicago, et cetera. And this is a discussion, I think, when we talk about economic violence or structural violence, this is a discussion about Black people and their history of fighting against the elite class or the capitalist class, and the capitalist class using state power to starve our people into submission, right? It's not complex. It is very much the billionaires of our world do not think it's in the best interest of Black people to be fully, to be whole, right? There's something intimidating about our wholeness, right? And so they say this is not the beginning. I mean, this is the culmination of a historic piece, right? And I'm going to go through some things so we can just say, like, when we talk about economic violence, we talk about the beginning of it in 1472. Portuguese negotiated the first slave trade, right? The first slave, they bought the first slave, right? That was the beginning of it, 1472. We're still dealing with it today, right? Then we move on to 1641, Massachusetts authorized slavery with legislation. So this is the state. So the capitalists bought us. The state, which is supposed to be the bedrock of our democracy, decided as a democracy that it was okay for slaves to be slaves, right? Making us all of those things, right? Moving forward to 1680, Virginia enacted the first major slave code. So it wasn't just that you were a slave. Now we got to create laws around what slavery actually looks like, right? Continue. 1705, Virginia relegated slaves, Indians, mulattoes to the status of property, right? So we talk about the term chattel slavery, right? We were the same thing as cows, right? Like you had a right. And so there was more protections for us when we were slaves than they are for us now. Right? People, they considered us property. And if you hurt someone's property, you know what I'm saying? Imagine if George Floyd happened when we were somebody else, they would come back and shoot the person who shot George Floyd because that was someone else's property, right? Now, moving forward, 1787, the 3/5 clause, 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act, the list just continues to go on, and it doesn't happen. Then we have a rebellion for civil rights. We just want to be civil. We just want civil rights, right? In 1960, which guaranteed qualified voters the right to register to vote. But right when we got the register, so that voting is core to this democracy. Essentially, voting in democracy means that if a decision is made that impacts you, you have a right to play a role in how the decision is made, right? That's why so many folks that's why so many laws are about stripping away one's ability to vote, right? Because that is the agency that's necessary to create change. And they've always been fighting to limit that agency as it relates to Black bodies, right? Fast forward, 1960, we get civil rights. 1971, they start the war on drugs, right? Michelle Alexander wrote a brilliant book, The New Jim Crow, that outlines the timeline of that, right? And what was the intentional purposes of the war on drugs, right? Here we got a heroin epidemic currently, and people are talking about care. How are we going to take care of these people? And when we were engaged in it and suffering from under the wrath of the of an epidemic around drug abuse, there was no care. It was, how do we lock these people up? They're monsters. They're super predators. A whole lot of narrative, right? But there's very little narrative now. Right? And so this system, and when I say that the elite, the ruling class, however you want to frame it, has worked particularly with the state in order to create these laws. It's not like, and when people often say that, like, this is like, oh, slavery was so long ago. But Benny can testify, and this is like why I lean on Benny heavily. We are still slaves today, right? Isn't it the 14th Amendment? Is that right, Benny? Say, you on mute.
13th Amendment.
13th Amendment, right? Says that you can be, that you are still a slave if you are under, if you are under arrest, if you're in prison, right? Unless it's prison, right? So that's current, right? And so I wondered when I was in prison and I was serving my time, when I was working, I was like, I was getting 25 cents a day. I was still happy because I was out my cell, you know what I'm saying? So I wasn't even tripping about the wages, not understanding that it was only legal because it was literally slavery, right? You know what I'm saying? And so, and I'm 30 something years old, but there's people that are younger than me that are in jail right now that are currently slaves, right? So we often push this off into the distant past, but these things are current, right? So when we talk about this whole structural violence piece, we gotta be fans of history. Black folks as a whole, we gotta be fans of history, because if we look at the history, we can see exactly how we got here, how we got to looting. How do we get to looting? 81% of young African-American males aged 17 to 24 in West Garfield Park are unemployed. Understand, this is capitalism. This is a wage-based economy, meaning that I have to sell my labor to a company in order to acquire a means to subsistence, which means that that's food, water, shelter. You want to see the feds kick your door and start selling milk out your back door. Like, get a cow, put it in your yard, and start milking it and start feeding the block. You'll have the feds kicking in your door faster than you selling dope, right? So we don't have the ability to actually grow and produce our own foods legally, right? So we have to sell our labor. But if you're formally incarcerated, they say you can't sell your labor, right? So you're stuck in a system that demands wages, but won't allow you to acquire wages. And so that essentially for me is what we mean by economic violence, right? How are you gonna tell somebody they cannot survive, right? And then damn them if they do. And so those are the circumstances that I think a lot of our folks are frustrated about. And you talk about one of the biggest unemployment crises in the history, that's paired with one of the largest state investments in upward mobility. So this is one of the most historic moments for the elite. There's been a larger influx of capital to the ruling class than ever in the United States of America. That's a fact. Jeff Bezos is a billionaire, and you got people homeless. You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't make sense. So I think when we talk about structural violence, we also got to talk about, we got to hone in on what is that structure, and then also provide frameworks or space for people to envision a different structure, right? What can we create, right? And so when we talk about defund, et cetera, we're saying defund this carceral system because it ain't working. Look at the results, right? It's like 70, 80% of our folks that come home, they're back in prison within a year. So if it was actually reforming something, those wouldn't be the results, right? And it's bad to begin with. But at the same time, those are the things that I'm thinking about. I want to hear Monica jump in because I see Monica over in the corner. That's when I'm a fan of Monica as well.
But I'm glad you said that, because I was going to call in Monica and Denise anyway, not because they can't speak to what's been talked about, because they can, but because we're short on time and I want to make sure that we make a bit of a transition. And I'm glad that you actually opened up that space. Everybody's just kind of opening up the space for the next person. I appreciate that. Yeah, we got to create, right? And again, when we talk about violence, our people have been hurt. They have been harmed. The trauma is real. And a lot of the things that we see come from that place of being hurt. Hurt people hurt people. And so I know that the both of you are very committed to defunding the police and funding communities and abolishing prison systems and creating possibility for people to actually thrive and live and grow. But talk a little bit about that healing. And I know that this is not just unique to this conversation, that's something that's happening in the movement, and also the work that McCormick and CRS and Just Harvest are doing. Through this work, we've heard from students and others that healing is just going to be so necessary in this work of justice. We cannot separate the two. So I'm going to ask Monica to go first, and then Denise, share a bit about what does this look like for you? How is this showing up in your work? And what are some examples that you can give about how you have made this part of the movements that you are joining or that you brought? What kind of wisdom can you bring to this conversation on that? Monica, and then Denise.
There's so much I want to speak to, Richard and Betty and Denise, but I'm going to start off with healing. So the first thing I want to say is the police are looting. The prison industrial complex is looting. Settler colonialism and imperialism is looting. Ads, whatever. Okay. When we talk about healing, I try to believe that some of the work I do leads towards that, right? In terms of getting people out and finding ways to live with and cope with the things that have happened to us. So we know that most people that are locked up, and the percentage is like way higher for women, but it's over, I think it's like 67 to 82% of people in designated men's joints, and almost 100% of of people in designated women's joints are survivors of domestic and or sexual violence, often over the course of a lifetime. And so when we talk about recidivism, so we know that when we're talking about violence, we do this whole thing when we're like pushing to get people out of prison or not go to prison in the first place. We differentiate all the time between violent and nonviolent offenders, right? It is people that were locked up for a long time, convicted of violent crimes, that are the least likely to return to prison on a new case or station. It is the short timers that are struggling with mental wellness issues, substance abuse or addiction or whatever it is that we call that, right? And so those things together, and we know there's this overarching poverty, right? Poverty and racism and misogyny that's built into the system. So we know that, right? And so people are living in this, and what we have is the people that are going right back to prison are the people that are struggling with addiction and mental wellness issues and housing insecurity and instability, right? And these things are happening all at the of these things. It's a fucking miasma that people are in, right? And so when we catch people up into the system, you wind up in the prison, or they put you in this rehab that's been working the same way for like 30 years, and we go through rehab in the prison, and then it's obviously not helping because people are still steady going back. And so what some of us have begun to do is try to work out new ways of healing, right? And so some of it is talking with other people that have been locked up for a long time, and how did you do it? How did you get to a place that you were at least stable and functional, so that you can get to a place where you can heal, right? And replicating those things, right? And so that's healing, and healing is absolutely, it's justice, and it's disruptive, right? I think it's disruptive to the state. We need to be, it's not that we can't get anything done if we are running around unhealed and injured and wounded. We can get hella shit done, but we also have to live at the end of all this, right? And to be able to live peacefully. One of the things I wanted to answer to, actually, Richard, you said earlier about speak and code switching. So I was on a call a few weeks ago, and we were talking about interpersonal and domestic violence in the prison and how do we deal with it. And this is the thing that I said. You know, a couple of us will go to the person that's hurting someone else and be like, hey, you can't be doing that because, you know, you're going to bring heat to the spot. And so the person that I was on the call with was like, well, we understand out here how violence affects the whole community. We understand that shit in prison too. I need you to check me out. My language that we're saying when we go to a person who's hurting someone else in the joint is, you fucking up. You're hurting all of us. So you're hurting her, you're hurting your partner. You're gonna feel fucked up about this later. You know what I'm saying? And you're hurting all of us because now we already in the prison, you're gonna bring extra police presence to the unit. So we understand how violence affects our whole communities. We're just maybe using a little bit of a different language, you know, and vocabulary than maybe some folks are used to dealing with. And my whole like, you don't understand some shit we're saying, you ask. You know what I'm saying? Don't assume that we're not using the right language for you. You know, I've had issues like this in some other spaces, right? And it's frustrating and sickening, right? Actually listen to us, don't try to check our language. You know, don't require that. I don't have to be nice all the time. I ain't gotta kiss nobody's ass all the time to get some shit done. Sometimes it just takes telling the truth, but people gotta be able to listen. And if you can, maybe you consider like taking yourself someplace else into another space that you are more comfortable doing the work, because there are some shit that we deal with that we know. Also, this is not quite it. we get cited a lot for lived experience. That shit is an expertise. Benny Lee, how many roommates have you had? Richard, how many roommates have you had? I counted my roommates once because, you know, we count in prison, right? We count shit. We count the bricks on the walls, especially we don't say, you count the lines between the bricks, you count the bars, when you just count. I counted my roommates once. I had like 3,000 roommates in less than a year. I was locked up for 20 years. How many roommates do you think I had, right? If I had 3,000 in 1 year. And so I've had this like incredible run of short, super intense relationships. And that's research all day long. That's fucking expertise. I know you, I know how you was living, you know how I was living. So we don't need University of Chicago or fucking any big foundation or university or whatever to come and do some motherfucking research. We did it already. So when we come out and we're telling you we need housing that does not replicate the prison. Halfway houses are satellites of the prisons. DV shelters, by the way, tend to replicate that same dynamic also. So if we come out this mode, out of prison, and we come out here and we're telling y'all, this is the shit that we need, and we need it like this right now. Your job ain't to tell us to wait, or don't say it like this, or try to check our qualifications, or do the research. We did it already. We did it already. That's a lived expertise that we have. It's more than just a lived experience. When we say lived experience, I know it's meant well, but also you say we have these two panelists with all their experience, right? And then we have these other two with their lived experiences. Why are you differentiating, right? This is an extra hard fucking won and earned expertise. Feeling a little pissy. And I wish we had more time because there's so much more of this that I want to get into. But go ahead. I know we're running out of time.
Thank you, Monica. Denise?
Wow, thank you so much. I'm just like taking it all in. Y'all are so powerful. I think, you know, for me, when I'm thinking about healing and creating a space where that's going to be normalized, I feel like I also come from nonprofit. Like I said, I come from a harm reduction framework. And so I'm always thinking about that. I'm always thinking about reducing harm. How do I break generational curses? How do we holistically respond and intervene? You know, how do we start in, you know, with the young people, you know, how do we build these bridges early on? You know, healing is a practice, you know, and it's not linear, and healing justice addresses the whole person. And it's also about self-determination. You know, so healing justice is about self-determination, interdependence, and resilience. And so, you know, when I'm thinking about the programs that I want to have in this space, you know, those are the frameworks that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about, you know, how do we not only empower ourselves by seeing ourselves as leaders, as teachers, as facilitators, but also as healers, to be able to understand what we're coming from, so understand those lived experiences that we're speaking about. Many of us have those same traumas, those poverty traumas, and even if our experiences aren't 100% the same, when we come from those same communities and those same backgrounds and those same oppressive structures, you know, then we, you know, we're also affected by that trauma. We're also affected by that system, and that system affects your mind, your body, and your spirit. And I think that we haven't always connected that, you know. I think that, like you said, Monica, like we can be really trauma, you know, filled and just go and get shit done, you know. Like I, as a single mother, that's all I did was survive, you know. So now as I'm thinking about, you know, creating this space where I'm thinking about, no, I don't want to just survive. I don't want us to just survive. I want us to thrive. I want us to be healed. You know, how do we do that? How do we create those accessible pieces, accessible people, and accessible programs to help, right? In a way that empowers us. It doesn't take our power away. It doesn't feel like we got to go get charity in order to, you know what I mean, to get help. No, we're building together. We're figuring that out together. We're having those tough conversations, right? We're having those circles, those peace circles. We're getting that restorative justice training. You know, we're you know, having, you know, support groups with a therapist. You know what I'm saying? We're having a free hive line on the website where people can just call in and get 15 minutes with a psychiatrist who looks like them, who can, you know, be accessible to them, to address those things, to give tools, to give, you know, ideas on how to, you know, work through these traumas and these systems. And this is long term, you know, this is not overnight, you know, we know that, you know, but we got to start somewhere. We got to start within our own home. We got to start within our own communities with our children. You know, I also come from chancla culture. I come from, you know, violence as a way to keep us in line. You know, that's something that's very ingrained in our culture too, as Latinx people, as Caribbean people, as people in, who are connected to the African diaspora. We come from that violence too, you know, because it's been inflicted on us. And so we perpetuate it even within our own homes with our own children. So that's what we got to start. So we're thinking about homeschool hubs, so we can have these, you know, abolitionist frameworks that we can work on and we can learn together and we can build together as a community of parents and raising children to reduce harm, to also empower, you know what I'm saying? Because I think we can talk all day about the pathologies and the oppressions and all the things that we're up against, you know, but I'm really trying to think about what are we gonna build, you know, like I wanna build something and, you know, I can't wait for the state to build it for me or for the government to build it for me. I want us to build it within because we have that brilliance within. We have it. You know what I'm saying? Like everything comes from us, from our culture, from Black people, from Indigenous people. You know, we need to go back to that, go back to the land. You know, we're talking about, you know, how do we grow our own, like you said, Richard, that's so powerful. And you know, we know that. I think a lot of us are starting to get into that understanding and really connecting those dots on wellness and interconnected, you know, each one, you know, helping together and building those blocks. And I also think it's very strategic the way Black and brown folks have been pitted against each other and with this scarcity mentality, you know what I'm saying? And not recognizing we in the prisons together, we in the schools together, we're in the neighborhoods together. We need to build together. We need to network together. We need to share that brilliance. We need people like Richard, Paseo Boricua, hollering at the homies over there, talking about that experience. We need, you know, we need each other. And so I want that space to be that space where that's welcomed and that's built and that's, you know, expanded on. So.
We knew that this conversation was going to be amazing. And we knew that 1 hour was not going to be enough time. And I wish that it was. But we are going to move to the Q&A from the folks who are joining us tonight and to give them an opportunity to ask some questions. But before we move into that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you. And this is just the beginning of the work that we all have to do. And I'm hoping that we'll find another opportunity to come together and you know, imagine and strategize and build some shit and tear some shit up and get some stuff done. So I'm gonna turn it over to, I think it's Waltrina. Dr. Middleton is going to lead the Q&A.
Peace and greetings. Thank you all so much for the beautiful and powerful and courageous conversation. We're very grateful for Richard, Monica, Benny, and Denise for just your prophetic voices and for calling us out and calling us into action. So thank you. We have some questions from our community watching today, and we're going to start with a question from Mary Sanders, who in particular, she's directing this to Richard, but I invite everyone to respond. And she wants to ask, realizing the significance of hiring or involving only the formerly incarcerated, is there a danger of perpetuating another level of exclusion for those that may not have this experience? Is it possible for that to be a reverse form of exclusion? And if you all could speak to that thought that Mary has lifted up for us.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead. I was waiting for this. And so let me explain. This Black Death is a billion-dollar industry, multi-billion-dollar industry, billions. I've worked at numerous institutions where I was paraded around as the formerly incarcerated voice. I had no power or decision-making power in the organization, none. But I would relive my trauma on behalf of campaign slogans and organizations that had never had my core beliefs or my core people and at their core. We would win campaigns and the conditions of the people would not change. Conditions of formerly incarcerated people would not change. I would cry on stages about the years that I spent incarcerated and relive that trauma for y'all viewers as if it was just theater, right? And when I say this is $1 billion, look, this is what I say would eat, right? And we don't only hire formerly incarcerated people. It just so happens that's all I know. and so with that, I think that when we talk about the nonprofit industrial complex, there are statistics that drive the capital that comes into this nonprofit industrial complex. It's statistics like unemployment rates, statistics like homicide victims. 75% of the homicide victims in the city of Chicago are young African-American men, 17 to 24. That same population has the highest rate of unemployment in the city of Chicago, 81%, right? That same population is the same population that is the highest percentage of offenders, right? And those statistics and those numbers turn into capital through the form of grants, et cetera, to alleviate the problem, right? Those grants then go to organizations who decide decide on a strategy to actually implement the change that's necessary to make that communication, that situation better. So the resources, the money that was generated off the death of these individuals doesn't actually go into the pockets of those people. It goes into institutions which are not ran by those people to create solutions that generally don't work for those people, right?
So break it down for her. What's the distinction for those who are trying to say that you're excluding those who have not had the experiences being incarcerated? How do we help make it plain for them to understand the distinction and why it is or is not the same?
And so there is, it's like the all lives matter argument, essentially, right? It's the all lives matter argument just kind of twisted. It's not that I won't hire someone that isn't formerly incarcerated. It's that I prioritize formerly incarcerated people because they are the most impacted by unemployment,
right?
Right. And so like they need jobs. Like the biggest surplus of unemployed people in Chicago are young African Americans, 17 to 24. Why wouldn't you want to hire those people? You understand?
It's a matter of equity. Are we even talking about equity here? Because you can say, well, let's hire someone because we don't want to exclude, but we have to think about, just as we talk about as Blacks in this country, the disadvantages that we experience as Black bodies because of all of the history that you outlined for us. We're talking about equity.
So what I'm saying is that it's their money.
Right.
It's their money. When billions of dollars come down for formerly to change incarceration, right? It is their money. I'm giving them their money back. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so if you're not formally incarcerated, you don't even line up with the statistics, right? So why would you want to benefit from something that didn't disempower you? It just doesn't make any sense. So if you can come volunteer all day, but the assumption that you think you should get paid off of someone else's statistics is problematic. You understand what I'm saying? If you advocate that you deserve to receive a salary off of someone else's suffering, that is a problematic analysis, right? And so part of me is like, I get it, right? I get it, but I'm not necessarily interested in the discussion.
I'm feeling it, and I see Monica snapping and others nodding in agreement, and I thank you for making it plain because that's what we need right now. Monica, do you want to jump in on this? And Benny and Denise, if you could offer some insight as well. And we have another question that kind of connects to that I want to lift up as well.
I believe where Richard coming from is that people that don't have criminal backgrounds don't have to worry about being denied a license to become a physician, and they can become a physician. A person with a background cannot become a license to become a physician or real estate broker and all those things. People without backgrounds have those opportunities. And then for me to say, I want to hire formerly incarcerated convicted people, one, it's empowering, to empower them, do for self, but at the same time give a message that, hey, in spite of all these barriers that classify us truly not as second-class citizens, but with limited citizenship. We don't have total citizenship. You know, I argued this in front of Congress. They're saying that we paid our debt, but if I paid my debt, why is it Walmart can have a policy say they don't hire convicted felons, and they might even hire me as a stock boy, and I got a degree? And see, a person without that background ain't faced with those situations. So it's about giving formerly incarcerated convicted person an opportunity where they can't get them somewhere else, and at the same time to empower them, but at the same time it's self-help, right? And those that's not formerly incarcerated, yeah, it's just like doing the abolitionists. Most of the abolitionists were not former slaves. But Frederick,
Let's stay right there, Brother Benny, because we have a question that comes from a former co-worker of yours, Brett Jacobson. And what Brett is raising is a question of where do we distribute these resources and funds? And I want everyone to feel welcome to respond to Brett's question as well. And Brett is basically asking, do we pour those funds into the system to address trauma, to address mental health and substance abuse within the current prison system? Or do we focus on preventive measures with young people in the community before they get there? And so I'm interested in your response to Brett's question and ask others to respond as well.
well, one, the children will not become the next offender if the parent is given an opportunity to get them their lives together. So now if I got a drug problem, if I'm uneducated and I can't market myself for employment to take care of my child, that leads me to some kind of criminal act. Then I need to be treated and dealt with, right? Because that's a psychological impact, that's a traumatic experience. So if I'm not healthy, then how can I function? And then that in turn, it impacts my child, right? And then once I go to prison, if I'm not treated with all those things, all those stimulants that cause me to end up in prison in the first place, if I'm not treated while I'm in prison, when I walk out of prison, I'm a leader still ill prepared to cope with my circumstances. So yeah, money should be going into trauma, mental illness, and substance abuse, because who's in prison? You don't find a lot of educated black men in prison or black women in prison. It's uneducated, poor black men, poor white men, poor white women, poor and uneducated Hispanic. That's who in prison. Not just all white folks, but poor, uneducated white people are in prison. And that's trauma, that's illiteracy, that's mental health, all that combined. So they must be treated while they're in prison to come out whole, somewhat whole, but then they get traumatized again, even in an interview, when that interviewer say, well, we do background checks. That's a traumatic experience. So if I learn how to self-rescue myself, because I'm recognizing this is traumatizing me, I can better cope with that moment and move with my head up and pull through that situation. If I'm not treated and understand trauma, I'll fall apart in that interview when they say they do background checks and all that stuff, because that's a traumatic experience. So yeah, both while incarcerated and prior to incarceration, so that our young people don't become the next offender.
Right. Monica, looks like you have a response as well.
The state already has money. IDOC already has a gazillion dollars that they can use. I would not say that we need to pour more money into it for them to continue to do the dumb shit that they've been doing for the last 30 years. And in particular for women, women have been the fastest rising percentage of the prison population for the last like 20 years or so, right? And they're still doing the same shit they've been doing. So I would not say, like, let's give them more money to do more dumb shit. I'm all about that defund, disarm, disband, and that includes IDOC. A lot of people, so all the extra super police that we've seen out here, these are the TAC teams. So I don't know if people realize this. Illinois Department of Corrections has a whole TAC team, right? We call them Orange Crush. They make them available to like your little local constabulary in cases of rebellion and insurrection, right? We don't need to give IDOC any more money. what I would say is to give money to those communities to be spent and determined to be used by people in those communities. Don't nobody got to come from on high, someplace else that ain't from there, don't know shit about it, to determine how it gets used and spent. That's our shit anyway. You know what I'm saying? And when we talk about like investing in you, so if you have a young person that's struggling with whatever they're struggling with, then we help that family. So one of the things that we don't think about is like, we think about the PIC and we think like a lot of times, I think in some spaces, we're thinking only about like police and prisons. We're not necessarily thinking about those other state agencies that work with it, like say DCFS, for instance. So we know a lot of times if you get a DCFS case, it's almost always going to trigger a criminal legal case. If you get a criminal legal case for primary caretakers, most of whom are moms, triggers a DCFS case, right? And so when you know that, like, what is it? I think that there are 22 different reasons right now that the state of Illinois can terminate your parental rights. Most of that shit centers around material goods, how much stuff you have, right? And so if you don't have enough stuff, right, there's other shit in there too, but if you don't have enough just stuff, enough bedrooms, enough beds, enough food, then you get this whole bunch of stuff that you have to do. And if you don't get it done, you're losing your kids. There's umpteen women sitting in the joints right now that have IEPs, that have DCFS cases, open DCFS cases too. The prison isn't going to meet the things that they're supposed to be doing to demonstrate to the court that they even deserve to see their kids, much less get their children, have a chance to get their children back when they get out, right? And so pouring money into state agencies that already don't do shit but continue to harm us, that's not your answer. It's investing in our communities, like right now, communities that have been deliberately disinvested in over the last since ever.
Thank you for that response.
Right.
And
also,
that we're listening.
None of us are offenders. I've been mightily offended in my day, but I am not an offender. I'm not an ex-offender. And I don't believe that anyone in prison or that was in prison or maybe on the way to prison is an offender, right? In some cases, maybe we made a mistake, right? But those mistakes that we made, we were people that were shaped by the culture that we live in, but we're not offenders.
Thank you, Monica. And thank you all for the response.
That's what I've got.
Can you hear me okay? Denise, we'd like to ask you a question, and then we'd like to invite all of you to share some call to action, so you can start thinking about what are some call to actions that we can share with those that are checking in today to be in solidarity with this work. Denise, Brittany Kim is asking, what are some strategic ways that we can get involved with decarceration efforts in order to help support formerly incarcerated people?
I think you got to follow up with the folks who are doing that work, and I think those folks are here. I don't specifically work with formerly incarcerated people specifically. I have worked with them in direct service. I think when I've worked in nonprofit direct service work, I think it's also about equity too. Like, I think I'm just gonna, co-sign on what everybody else said, because they're the ones who are, doing the work for that specific population, which is really important. It's really the hardest population, to get equity, to get employment, to get justice in a lot of ways. And so I think that, we have to start thinking about these greater oppressive structures. I think individually, really arming ourselves with knowledge, with learning, with listening, and creating spaces that are more restorative, and I think, part of what the work that we're going to try to do at the Honeycomb Network is create those spaces so that we can have those conversations, so we can have that restorative justice framework, and we can open that space up so that we can, walk our talk and practice that. So that's what I would say in terms of that. And if anybody else wants to jump in who's part of that, definitely.
So how do we walk that walk and talk the talk, and practice what we preach? How do we call folks to action? And you all have shared very profoundly so many resources and knowledge and have enlightened us in so many ways. And I'm so grateful for each of you. But we want to send forth those that have joined us tonight with some tools and call folks to action. And so I'm going to start with Denise again, and then go to, let's see, we'll go to Monica and Benny and then Richard. And if you all could please respond in that order and share what are some calls to action that we can offer to those that have joined us this evening. And thank you all so much.
Thank you so much again. I think some calls to action would be to connect with people who are doing work locally on the ground, especially in Chicago. Like I'm thinking specifically of like the Let Us Breathe Collective. I'm thinking, you know, also Asada's Daughters, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, these organizers who are doing real, you know, on the ground work to defund police, to, you know, push up against these narratives and these oppressive systems. And I think that we have to we have to be open to reimagining and to looking at things through a different lens. I think that we're all we were raised in this system, this sort of carceral state violent system. And even within our own communities, we can't even imagine what it would look like to not have it, you know, like, what do you mean? Like, what does that even look like? And so I think those conversations, accessible conversations need to happen, you know, where we're getting together and we're dialoguing and we're reading and we're learning and we're having those tough conversations, we're having those tough dialogues, and we're recognizing our own privileges, we're recognizing the root cause of things, which is, yeah, you know, Richard spoke on it, it's capitalism, it's white supremacy, honestly, you know what I mean? And it's just like, those things are interconnected. And so we need to think about, you know, abolitionist frameworks, and we need to be looking at queer feminist leaders who are leading these movements, and we need to be listening, and we need to be learning. And that's where I would say, you know, that's where the call for action would be for somebody who's looking to just like start, is to start looking for those local folks, to start looking them up, you know, read about them, start looking at the books that they're citing. You know, this abolitionist work is not anything new. You know, this is you can find tons of work, literature, you know, a breakdown of what this is and how to do it from like 19th century abolitionist movements makers who were all Black. You know what I'm saying? Like and POC, you know, across, you know, Indigenous, Black, that the framework is there. You know, we just got to find it. And I think that part of why we don't find it is because it's not accessible. It's not taught to us. You know, so we need to create those spaces where we can teach ourselves. And a lot of folks are doing that work. So if you want to learn, then you got to go and put yourself in a space to learn it. You know, you got to want to be open to it. You got to want to reimagine something different, to know that this lens is crooked, you know, and to, you know, seek out more creative, more just solutions. So that's what I would say. So yeah, definitely Let Us Breathe Collective. I would definitely follow them. BYP 100, of course, you know, are always, you know, leading, you know, those are two that I definitely look to consistently, and who I listen to, and who I, you know, where I get my framework and my thinking from as well. So those are some folks I would say.
Thank you. And Richard, why don't you jump in and share some thoughts, and then we're going to call on the next.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I wanted to say in the last conversation, it wasn't lifted up, is just reparations. Like, the experiment of what you all think you need to do to help us is over. Like, at this point, you have to give us the capital and let us define that self-determination. This petri dish approach to Black solution building is so problematic. And all it is billions of dollars come into these places, and then folks with, you know, PhDs think about, this is what they need. No, this is what they need. No, we're gonna give them the money. Give us our reparations and let us define how we're our pathway to success, and leave us the hell alone. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need no more experiments, y'all. And so that's my thing. You can follow us on, you know, at Eat Chicago is our website.org. Get down with, I think support the Breathe Act, which is coming out. It's a federally funded policy. It's coming out of the Movement for Black Lives policy table. So shout out to the Black women that led that policy development, Gina, and all of the brilliant folks in the Movement for Black Lives. Support not just the defund work, but support the alternatives. We are in the process of developing guaranteed income for system impacted people, which is important because what happens is, I'm gonna say this, we have to stop bifurcating our communities into deserving and undeserving, right? We have some folks in our community, we're like, oh, they're brilliant, the talented 10th. We're gonna invest heavily in them. And then the street folks, you're like, no, we're gonna leave them alone. It's the opposite, right? We have to invest I think we gotta begin to look at crime as an indicator of need, not an indicator of punishment. And so we have to look at this thing like, where are the programs? If you're a researcher, jump down with any of these organizations, help us draft some policies to demand guaranteed income. Jump down and support demands for reparations. Some folks will be all about the social services because they get a check out of that, but you won't get a check out of reparations. Are you down? You know what I'm saying? Those are the questions I'm asking in this moment. And so I'm excited. Thank you for inviting me. We got a website, we got a guaranteed income pilot project that we're launching. We got to raise $1 million to do that, and we're going to do it. And so I'm excited about all of the work that everybody's leading, and I look forward to the next discussion. Marilyn, thank you. You already know you're my family. Thank you for having me out.
We're excited as well. Brother Benny, would you please respond? And thank you so much for your time.
I stepped away and let my dog out. I didn't catch the question.
No problem. We just would like a call to action or some ways that folks can engage this work in authentic and transformative ways.
Well, one, people can educate themselves of the facts on how those of us that's been to prison and even jail, and some people never even been to jail, but they just been arrested and never even been to jail, but they end up with a conviction as a result of that arrest and that charge, right? So when we're talking about reentry, it ain't that people just been to prison or been to jail. You got people that just been charged and went to court and got convicted and probably got probation or just spent the night and got time considered. So that's a conviction, and they run into the same barriers. Only difference is those of us that's been to prison, we've been kind of impacted by that moment of being incarcerated because that's a system of domination. It has a psychological impact on you. We got to learn how to heal from that once we come out. But when it comes to how do you contribute to this work, one model we came up with is reentry circles. We believe that every community where there's a high concentration of formerly incarcerated and convicted people returning back to that particular community, they should have a place where they can just walk to. One, be part of a support network where they can walk in the circle and there's a resource table. They can get connected resources. There's reentry coaches there to coach them through their reentry process where they have to pay. It's free of charge, where they can get connected with where they can get a state ID, a towel or some women dresses to go job searching, and a list of companies that normally hire formerly incarcerated convicted people. And this is something people that are not formerly incarcerated can set up. But the reentry circle should be led, it's a peer-led circle. It should be led by formerly incarcerated convicted people because it's empowering. It's just like alcoholics go to AA, addicts go to Narcotics Anonymous. Formerly incarcerated and convicted people should go to some type of support group like a winner circles or a overcomers meeting or a reentry circle. And this is something that communities can help give space to have this happen, to use their resources they have to help and support, because everybody, when you walk out that gate, you got to figure out how you're going to feed yourself, how you're going to clothe yourself, because wherever you get paroled to, it ain't guaranteed they're going to continue to feed you, clothe you, give you bus fare to get around. You got to figure that out. So if people can just contribute in that way, we could, I know, like James Brown say, I'm not asking you to just do nothing, but just open the door and I can do it myself.
Do it myself.
That opportunity, self-help. Give me that self-help opportunity, so that's anybody can contribute. Young Black children need to know that the Underground Railroad was made of white folks, abolitionists, Quakers. It wasn't Black folks that made up the Underground Railroad. they create that passage from the south to the north for slaves to get through to get to freedom. So we're gonna always need allies. I don't just exclude, yeah, I need allies. I mean, I need people to help me get in doors that I can't get in because of who I am and what I am, or what they claim I am, right? So allies is important.
Thank you. And I believe Ruby Sales shared that, you know, for those that have oppressed and marginalized folks, you can be my comrade, but I will be your ally because I help you to live into your full humanity because of the harm that you have brought against me. We're going to close out with remarks from Monica to share her thoughts and recommendations on call to action. And before Monica comes before us, we definitely want to celebrate again the wisdom of Denise, Richard, Benny, Monica, Marilyn, who's been a phenomenal moderator and host, and all of our partners here this evening. And Reverend Annette Banks will come forward to also close us out, but we want to hear from you, Monica, with a call to action as well. Monica, are you still there? You're on mute.
Okay.
There you go.
As my last call to action, we're about to launch yet another mass clemency campaign. So the number of people in IDOC that have confirmed cases of COVID, there are like 60 in Logan right now. There are several in Decatur and Vienna, just all through IDOC. And so we're working with like a broad coalition under ILCHEP, which is the Illinois Coalition for Higher Education and Prison. And so what we're out, just a bunch of different organizations that are doing like clemency calls. And so we are going to ask people like to call the governor and the lieutenant governor to exercise their powers to release people. Right, we have people that volunteer to house people, right, coming out of prisons. And so just to let people out, because we know that COVID is going to decimate the prisons and places like nursing homes and places where people are closed in extremely close quarters, and that is the prisons, right? Their prisons are not right now making sure that enough people have masks, hand sanitizer, and other cleaning stuff. People aren't getting access to the phone. Some prisons, there's already been a mail delay, and that's even worse. So we'll be starting campaigns around that. And we have been doing that. We're just trying to up the ante again and work out more ways. I'm just ready to run up on the prison and just be like, let my peoples up out of there, right? But we are, working to try to get people out, and just to please continue to support all of the work that we're all doing right now, because it's so incredibly important. Richard, I look forward to working with you more and just talking with you more. This has been incredible. Denise, I would really love to talk with you more about that, getting down to that healing part of this work. I think one of the things that I noticed, so the idea of having spaces that's just us, just form those of us that were locked up, we need that space. We're not even supposed to have to ask for it. We're not supposed to have to ask for it. We're not supposed to have to apologize or explain or defend that we get those spaces, right? And it's not even that we deserve it, but it's that we deserve, but we should have never had to ask. You know what I'm saying? I went to a restorative justice conference in Oakland shortly after I got out. It was like, I had been out for less than a year. And there was a space that was just for us to be in the room. And some of the things that we were talking about there was, in terms of restorative justice, how you going to restore some shit we ain't never had, right? And so we had a lot of conversations around that. And I'll still say restorative justice. But when I think about the approach sometimes from some people in restorative justice spaces, it's coming with the presumption that you're coming to teach us poor folks how to feel compassion for somebody else, or how to feel regret or remorse or sorrow over something. You don't have to come and teach us that. We already have that, right? You don't get to restore our humanity. There's something incredibly lofty about that to me, right? I was already human. I was born a whole human. I was a human while I was in my mama's womb. I was a human when I was born, and I was a human still when I got locked up. I have been horribly dehumanized, but I was never not human for somebody to have to come and restore that, right? So I think that's something worth talking about more, and I wish we had more time to get into that piece of it, right? So when I think of restorative justice, I think to me of restorative justice, if restorative justice is supposed to be about the reparation of harm, we have been harmed for centuries. This country is built on harm, right? So in terms, like, I think restorative justice is reparations. That's what I think all day long, right? So interpersonally and structurally, it's about healing and reparation. That's what restorative justice is to me. And so the work I do is a part of that. I'm trying to restore my people back to their communities from whence they were stolen by the PIC, right? I wish we had more time. There's like so much I want to say, and so much of everything that my fellow panelists have said that I would love to respond to and talk more about. So maybe we all can get on a call later on. That would be awesome. And that's what I've got. Thank y'all for having me.
Can I jump in and just say I'm so for the reparations conversation as well. I just want to say that I'm so glad y'all brought that up, because I do think that at the end of the day, that's what it is. That's what it is.
Thank you all. Reverend Annette, if you'd like to close us out, again, thanking Reverend Dr. Marilyn Pagán-Banks for her guidance tonight as a host and moderator, and to each and every one of you, thank you all for joining us and sticking with us this evening.
Thank you so much for your areas of expertise. So to Richard and Denise and Monica and Benny, just thank you for the way in which you share yourselves, that others might live, that others might be inspired to live, and others might be inspired to work and fight, understanding that freedom is not free. It costs something, and it usually costs our energy, our time, our resources, and our intellect and our hands. So thank you so much for that. And for Marilyn and for Waltrina, and I know I'm being quite informal, Reverend Dr. Marilyn Pagán-Banks, Reverend Dr. Waltrina Middleton, I want to say just thank you for the ways in which you've navigated us through these conversations, but also for your partnership with McCormick. We are indeed grateful. And the Community Engagement Office at McCormick and McCormick Theological Seminary is really committed to community programming that promotes and inspires folks towards justice, freedom, healing, and peace, and flourishing for all people. And so we are grateful for a 6-week series that puts before us a conversation that often goes under the radar, or that people can easily dismiss and nobody gets upset about it being dismissed. So we want to make sure that conversations that have been dismissed, people who have been dismissed, have a platform and also have a space in which they can share their voice and their expertise. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank Gia and Rebecca for their work alongside of one of our partners, Westminster Presbyterian Church in Minnesota, that also put a lot of time and energy into the 5-week series. And so just want to thank you for that. And then I want to just leave you with this. Over the last few weeks, there has been a chant that has kept coming to my mind. It's a West African chant. It's Ago and Ame. And Ago means pay attention, be present. And Ame means I am willing to listen. And I believe this public education series and each of your stories and areas of expertise has called us, has said to us, Ago, pay attention. And that our response as participants and all those in the community should be Ame. We are willing to listen. So we go forward now with that in our minds, Ago and Ame, knowing that there is work to be done. May we all be blessed by a power greater than ourselves. And may our work not be in vain, but be for the flourishing of all people. Thank you so much for joining us, and God bless you. Good night.
Good night.